Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of January.
What we do here is go back.
Thank you, Jesus, that January is gone because it has been such a long and horrible month. And I thought it was just me thinking this, but people just started commenting on that, how horrible January had been, and I'm like, yes, thank you. It was just such a long month. Even with that being said, it being a long month, I didn't get to all the books that I wanted to get to in the month of January, so here we are. I had 10 books set out in my January TBR, and I ended up reading 9, but I think like 2 of these books that I read really weren't on my TBR. They just sort of like found their way into my hands because I did a lot of mood reading for January. At the beginning of the month, I found myself reading 2 books that I honestly didn't want to read, and I felt myself slumping, and I immediately switched out the books and started reading things that I wanted to actually read. I'm actually going to start this month, or this wrap up, a little bit different. I'm going to talk about the books that I read partially because I think that's important as well in your wrap up, because you actually did read something from that book, although you didn't completely finish it. I'm missing a book, actually. I'm missing 2 books that I don't know where they are because I have such a mess in my room, so I'll just go ahead and mention them, but just know that they are somewhere here in my room. The first book that I started the month with was Grace Is Gone by Emily Elgar. This is a book that I received from the publisher unrequested, and it sounded interesting, so I started reading. Halfway through, I actually got halfway through this book, and this book, although I was enjoying it, there were other books that I wanted to read more. There was actually nothing wrong with the book, and I do want to finish it, but just at that moment in time, it wasn't something that I was truly immersed in. Grace Is Gone is about, it's loosely based or loosely taken after the I forgot that really big case that there was about the little girl that was very sickly and had to take all this medication, and come to find out it was all a sham, and she ended up killing her mom. And so it's loosely based off of that. There's a lot of elements from that story in this book. Like I said, I did not finish it, but I will be hopefully in February, although my February TBR is a little bit out of control. The second book that I was reading and actually didn't finish, it was an ebook, and it was Doll Crimes by Karen Runge. And honestly, I cannot tell you what this book is about because I am 50 pages in and I didn't read the synopsis, and also I haven't really read anybody's reviews. I'm honestly going blind into this. The reason why I purchased this book is because the author went through something really horrible when her book was releasing, and so a bunch of us got together in the book community and just supported her and bought her ebook. I'm really liking it, but like I said, at 50 pages in, I have no idea what's going on other than we're following a mother and a daughter, and they aren't the most stable as far as house or homes go. Like, they keep moving around, and we're about to get to the nitty-gritty, I think. So that's another book that I'm really enjoying, that I have actually moved on over to my February TBR. Another book that I did not finish was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a book I was reading because Callie from Paige and Parla over on Instagram had a read-along for her birthday. This is her favorite book, and she just decided to do a read-along. It's a very short book, but this book was written many moons ago, and so I had a really hard time reading it. And it's a book that I do want to continue, but honestly, it's really not a priority for me, so I didn't get to finish that one either. And then the last and final book on my TBR that I'm super upset that I didn't get to finish is Salem's Lot. I actually do have this one here with me. This is actually for the Chronologically King, I think I have that hashtag right, read along that Cami over at Cami's Corner, I will link her down below, her Instagram and her YouTube down below. She's actually running this a year-long read-along where we're reading all of Stephen King's books in chronological order. We've already read book 1. This is book 2. I'm not done. We actually did watch the movie last night as a watch-along, but I'm not finished with it. And I am so mad about it because we're going into February now and we got 2 more books to read. We're reading The Shining and also Night Shift, which is a short story collection. I do plan on finishing this because I really, really want to, but upset that I didn't get to. So now we are finally jumping into the books that I actually did finish, and the ones that count really towards my wrap up. First book up is Carrie by Stephen King. I read this as part of the read along. This is Stephen King's first book. It's a really short one. This was my second time trying to read it. I don't know if you guys remember, a year or two ago I tried to read it and I just was not having it. I couldn't get into it. I couldn't understand it. It was going over my head. Like 6 pages in, I was like, I'm done with this book, and I put it down. Well, I listened to the audiobook this time, which really helped me out, really kept me pushing forward. The problem with this book and me is that I have already watched the movies long time ago, so I know how the story begins and how the story ends. Of course, there's differences, but ultimately the ending and the beginning are the same. So I found myself going through the book knowing what was going to happen and a little bored, if that makes sense. But still, a great book and a great way to start your writing career with a girl that has telekinesis. I mean, that's just insane. It was a really good book. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I feel I could even put it at a 3.5. Next book in the lineup is We Are Monsters by Brian Kirk. This was part of a Nightworms book party that we had where we all were able to read this and review it. It was so much fun. I enjoyed this book so much. Here we are following 2 doctors. One that likes to do things by the books, and the other one that likes to use a lot of medicine and things not so much by the book, a little bit more progressive. Is that the right word to say? I'm not even sure that I'm using the right word. But yeah, there's these 2 doctors and they have this psychiatric ward that they're looking after. The guy that does things by the book is actually the big guy in charge. He's the one that oversees everything, that has the last say in everything. And then we have Alex, which is his successor. Is that how you say it? Gosh, I suck at talking. And long story short, something happens to the main guy where he has to like step down, or he's forced to step down, and Alex is the one that takes over. Things go wrong with a certain treatment that he's trying to bring out to the market. He's trying to actually make some money and bring out this new treatment to treat patients with schizophrenia, and things go wrong, as they always do in horror books. This was a fun read. I really enjoyed it. There was a time, the second part of the book, where things got a little crazy and a little over the place. Even with all the craziness and all over the place things that were going on, it was still very easy to follow, and this was just a wild ride. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Next up in the lineup is The Stranger Diaries. This I read for the Buddy Reads to Die For group read along that Chandra and Janelle have going on Instagram. It's like an Instagram book club. I had never heard of this book until they brought it up, and I'm along for the ride with these girls, so I picked it up. I ordered it, and this was such a fun one. This is almost like a whodunit mixed with gothic vibes. We're following a teacher here that teaches in this school that used to be the mansion of this gothic writer, and she's obsessed with this writer. There are stories behind him and his family, mysteries about how his wife and daughter died. They believe the school to be haunted, and she's just trying to find answers. Her friend ends up being murdered, and they're trying to find who it was. And it's all following this main character, Claire. Now, this is told from different points of views. You have Claire, you have Georgie, which is her daughter, and then there's obviously other characters involved. Detective of the murder, and just a bunch of mysteries going on. This was so good. I just inhaled the story. I actually listened to this on audiobook as well, and the narrators were on point. It is a full cast. Since this is a story or a novel that's mixed in with gothic vibes, they had the perfect tone to give you that gothicness in the book. It was just so good. I really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Next, a book that wasn't really on my radar for the month, and I just picked it up because somebody asked me to join in. We were discussing the book and they asked me if I wanted to join in on the read along that he was having. I was like, sign me up, and I ended up reading Remains. I've had this book in my collection. Actually, my bookstee Eleni sent it to me for, I believe it was Christmas. It was one of the books on my wish list. And so I just decided to jump on board and read it, and boy am I so glad I did. Sorry if it's very reflective, but it's one of those shiny covers. This was so good. Here we are following a mother, and she has gone through the unfortunate event of her son dying, and her life is in shambles. She can't let go. She ends up going back to the house where her son was brutally murdered, and things just go from there. It is dark, it is creepy, it is sad what this mother's emotions, what she goes through being in this house, seeing where her son was murdered, and it's just, it was hard to read at times, but so good. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. If you're a mother, this will tear you apart when she's just grieving for her son. It's just, it was so good. I gave this 4 stars. Next up is another book that wasn't on my TBR and sort of crept in there the same way that Remains got onto my TBR. Also, Dear Laura got into my TBR. I've had the ebook, so I'll put the picture up here. I've had the ebook for like about a year and a half. I remember Sadie, which is at Mother Horror on Instagram, was talking about this book a long time ago. I ended up buying it, and it just sat there because it's an ebook, and you guys know how I am with ebooks. I finally read it, and I am so happy to report that I gave that book 5 stars. It was so good. Here we are following Laura, and in her teens, she experiences the disappearance of her best friend, her boyfriend, her first love, whatever you might want to call it. And she actually sees him getting into this van and driving off. And they had never been separated before. They were like best friends, and then they turned into teenage loves. And so she sees this, and she never sees him again. Couple years, maybe a year or 2 after this incident, she starts receiving letters from this anonymous person that says that he knows what happened to her best friend and actually has proof that he is dead. So this is going on for like some time. She keeps receiving letters and receiving like bizarre requests from this stranger to get information on where her best friend's remained or what, just to find answers. And it's just her journey through all of this. It was so good, so well written, and I really loved it. And again, I gave it 5 stars. Next was a buddy read with my friend Tali, and we buddy read The Wives for the month of January. I loved this so much. This was so good. A domestic thriller. This is by Taryn Fisher. This is my first Taryn Fisher book. I've heard that she is amazing. Eleni, my bookstee, loves Taryn Fisher, and I can see why. This has to do with a lady, and she is in this relationship. She's married to this man who's a polygamist, and he has 3 wives. So she's just living with this, trying to deal with it, trying to go day by day with knowing that she has to share her husband. There's certain days that are for her, then certain days that are for the wives, and then the story develops from there. It gets crazy, it gets twisted, it gets insane. It was so good. It was such a page turner. It was such a good book and so well written. I ended up giving this 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. Next is Skin Wrapper, and this was another one that we had a Nightworms book party for, and woo. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. This is a little novella. It is literally 80 pages. But my, oh my, what an amazing 80 pages this was. I went into this so blind, like really not knowing what I was getting myself into. If you guys can see that cover, I was just like, what is this? This is a sci-fi horror that if you're a sci-fi horror lover, you need this. This is actually a prequel novella to The Hematophages. I hope I'm saying that right. I think I'm saying that right. And it is a sci-fi horror. I don't know what else to say. There's really not much to say, but it does such a good job of keeping you hungry for the next book, and I really want to read the next book. I don't even know how to explain this, but I'm gonna read the synopsis so that you guys can know what this is about, because I can't explain it. It says, a single word strikes fear into the hearts of even the most experienced starship crews. Aboard the fighter Blue Whale, a young girl's day begins like any other, texting her friends while her parents bicker about breakfast. Then, with a loud, sickening pop, their domestic tranquility is shattered. A single word goes out over the emergency warning system. The galaxy's shipping lanes are plagued by a gang of vicious pirates suffering from all manner of terminal diseases. They require zero gravity to live. They also need a constant influx of fresh blood and organs, so their victims also become their unwilling donors. The band is so ruthless, so violent, that its very name has become a synonym for terror. A single word that chills the blood, even in the utter cold of space. The little girl finds herself alone, lost, and trapped aboard the vessel she called home, praying it won't also become her tomb. She is about to learn there is nothing in the universe worse than being hunted by a skin wrapper. You need this? I gave this 5 stars. Next is Stiff by Mary Roach. This was one of the read-alongs that I join every month. Our bookish true crime club run by Ashley over on Instagram. This isn't true crime, but it was a book that I guess everybody wanted to read. This just has to do with studying cadavers, human cadavers. Mary Roach just went on this expedition of knowing what happened to the body after it died. It goes into the history of autopsies, beheading, anything and everything has to deal with the human body after it's dead. It talks about organ donation. It talks about testing and educational purposes that our cadavers are used for. It was very, very interesting. My only problem with this book is that I did not expect it to have so much on animal experiments and testing as well. Whether it be killing the animals and testing them, or testing them and then killing them. There were parts that were very graphic that just broke my heart, and I just had to keep reminding myself, okay, this is about human cadavers, it'll be over soon. But I felt like every so often we talked about animal testing, animal death, animal killing, and animal experiments, which just messed me up bad. But other than that, it was very interesting. I especially loved the parts where she actually was able to experience a human autopsy and what it went through and what they were doing. Very interesting read. I ended up giving this 3 stars. If it wasn't for the animal testing, it would have been a different situation or altogether, because that just, it broke me in pieces. And the last and final book that I read was Bobbled by Stephanie Ellis. This was so good. How can I explain this? This was such a weird and unique story. Here we're following Tyler and his just sorry life. I mean, I hate to say that, but we start off the book and he's just living at home and with mom. His marriage is failing. He barely gets to see his son. I think he was an alcoholic at some point, so the wife forbid him to see the son, and all of this is going on. Meanwhile, we're thrown into the death of his grandfather, and his grandfather has like this huge mansion, and we just know that he has like this negative feeling towards that home. Next thing you know, we are at the reading of the will, and he has inherited that huge house, which he is just like, no, I don't want it. But apparently the wife and the mom are like, oh yeah, you know, get it. And they're trying to get money out of it. Poor guy. And he's just like, ugh. Well, in order for him to have access to the house, he either has to wait a year and then finally have access to it, or he can spend one last night there in the home and then he can do whatever happens. Or can he? So this has to do with a haunted house, an evil house, and just the happenings that go on in there. This is actually a house that has been in the family for many years. And inside this house, the grandfather used to work on these little bottles that have like little scenes in them. He's had Tyler, the grandson, has had very bad experiences with these little bottles that transport him to other worlds. All that he knows is that he wants to stop this from happening because he does not want his son anywhere near their house, anywhere near the bottles. The ending is insane. It is sick. It has like this gothic vibe to it. I really enjoyed this. There were times where I felt like it was a little bit confusing. Like I remember at the beginning when I started the book, I felt very confused, and I felt that I had to keep going back and reading. Although there weren't many characters, I kept getting Tyler and Paul. Tyler is the dad and Paul is the son. Kept getting them confused. They were talking about the grandfather in here by name, and I would get confused. And I'm like, wait, who is that? And I found myself going back and forth a few times before I can really get submerged into the story. And there were little times like that back and forth where something was thrown in the story and I was like, wait, what? And it was a little bit confusing. There were very small parts like that. Like the whole book wasn't like that. But either way, I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. And that's it. That is everything that I read for the month of January. I had a pretty good reading month. If I would have to pick one to be my favorite of all, it would have to go to Skin Wrapper because that was such a big surprise. I am a big lover of sci-fi horror. I always have been, but it's one of those things where I just stop reading it because I start reading other things and I sort of forget my love for sci-fi horror, and Skin Wrapper just has brought those feelings back out. I want to read all the sci-fi horror there is in that book. It was just so good, and I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to read it and actually experience it. I will link down below the blog post for Skin Wrapper so you guys could see all our thoughts on it. Let me know down below what books you read for the month of January and what was your favorite book. Let's chat books down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!